They called it the Unsinkable Beast, the largest battleship ever built in Europe.
Hitler's ultimate weapon, 50,000 tons of steel designed to rule the world.
May 1941. The mission was simple: break into the Atlantic and starve Britain.
But the ocean is a big place to hide a monster. The British Royal Navy scrambled everything they had. They had to stop it. Enter the HMS Hood, the pride of the British fleet. At dawn, the two giants locked eyes. The Bismarck fired first. A salvo of death aimed straight at the Hood. It took only 6 minutes. One lucky hit tore the British legend apart.
The Hood was gone. But that victory was actually the Bismarck's death sentence.
London went silent. Then, Winston Churchill gave the order: sink the Bismarck!
Every British warship in the Atlantic turned around. The hunter became the hunted. But the beast was bleeding. A shell hit had ruptured its fuel tanks. The Bismarck was losing fuel. It had to run for safety in occupied France. The weather turned brutal. Waves as high as buildings hid them from sight.
The British played their last card. The aircraft carrier Ark Royal joined the chase.
Their weapon? Not modern jets, but ancient canvas biplanes called swordfish.
It looked like a suicide mission, flying paper planes into a hurricane.
The British ships were too slow. The Bismarck was slipping through their fingers.
For hours, the ocean was empty. The British fleet was sailing blind.
But on the Bismarck, Admiral Lutyens made a fatal miscalculation.
He thought the British were still tracking him. So he broke radio silence. A 30-minute message to Hitler. It was the longest suicide note in history.
British listening posts triangulated the signal. They had him. The Ark Royal turned into the wind. The deck was heaving like a roller coaster. 15 biplanes took off into the darkest storm of the year.
Through the clouds, they saw a ship. They didn't wait for confirmation. Back on deck, there was no time for pity. They swapped the faulty triggers for contact ones. Time was up. By sunrise, the Bismarck would be under the protection of the German Air Force.
They launched again, flying into pitch darkness against the deadliest ship on Earth. The Bismarck spotted them. The sky turned into a wall of fire and lead.
But the old biplanes were too slow. The modern German guns couldn't aim low enough.
One pilot saw an opening. He dropped his torpedo, aiming for the rear.
Impact. It didn't sink the ship, but it hit the one place that mattered: the rudder. The rudder was jammed 12 degrees to port. The giant could only drive in circles.
The crew knew it was over. In the dark, they wrote final letters home.
Dawn broke. The horizon filled with smoke. The executioners had arrived.
HMS Rodney, carrying the biggest guns in the British Navy, ready to kill.
8:47 a.m. Fire. Shells the size of cars screamed across the ocean.
The Bismarck tried to fight back, but the spinning ship couldn't aim. Its shots went wild.
Then, impact! British shells smashed the deck. Steel melted like wax. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was target practice. They hammered the ship without mercy.
The British fired nearly 3,000 shells, turning the pride of Germany into Swiss cheese.
The ship was a burning inferno, a scrap heap.
Admiral Tovey couldn't believe his eyes. The ship was a wreck, but it wouldn't go down.
The British battleships were running on fumes. They had to leave, or they would be stranded.
They turned back to England, leaving the burning monster behind, still afloat.
Inside the Bismarck, the final order was given. Scuttle the ship! Open the sea valves!
The combination was too much. The great ship groaned and began to roll over. The ship was gone. But for the survivors in the water, the horror was just beginning.
Silence returned to the Atlantic. The pride of the German Navy was gone.
In Berlin, the news was crushed. Hitler lost his favorite toy. He would never trust his surface navy again. But why did it take 3 days to die? The secret lay in the steel. Wotan hard steel. The turtleback armor design protects the vitals. Shells bounced off it like pebbles. The British destroyed the top of the ship, but they couldn't break the hull. The Bismarck was unsinkable by gunfire.
It wasn't battleships that killed it. It was a canvas biplane from the previous war.
For 48 years, the monster slept in the darkness, 15,000 feet down. Then, in 1989, we found it, and we saw something impossible. It was sitting upright, guns trained on the horizon, still defiant, even in death. Forensic scans confirmed the truth. The British shells destroyed the upper works, but the Germans sank the ship themselves.
The guns are gone. When the ship capsized, gravity pulled the 1,000-ton turrets out of their sockets.
The Bismarck was the peak of naval engineering. But it was also a dinosaur.
Its sister ship, the Torpedo, learned the lesson. It hid in Norway, terrified of the open ocean.
The era of the gun was over. The era of the bomb had begun.
48,000 tons of steel, 2,000 lives, all for a mission that lasted only 8 days.
Today, the Atlantic is silent. The monster sleeps in the dark.